Todd Fleming in the Philippines here. And we're trying out different locations in which to make videos. And you can hear my delightful wife singing in the background. Anyway, I want to do, to continue with the Civilization series, I want to look at how it all began. And in order to find out how civilization began, you actually need to go back a very long way, because it really began, the roots of it are when we stood up. And that was about 3 million years ago, when one of our ancestors, perhaps several, but the one we have record of is a species called Australopithecus Africanus, which is a small hominid, between 3 and 4 feet high. It wasn't a very big animal, but it stood up. And this is a really surprising thing to do. You know, you and I, we walk around all the time, unless we've had some problems, and we don't think about it too much. We just don't, we just do it. But when you do think about it, you realize that walking, standing up and walking, these are actually, it's a big step to take. It's a big move, you know, to start with. If you think about how you locomote, how you get around, humans perpetually fall forwards. That's actually how you walk. You fall forwards, right? So you have a system controlled by your brain called dynamic balance, which prevents you from actually falling over when you do this. And so you're, you know, the next leg comes forward and daddy-da, and that's how kids learn to walk. It's not at all straightforward for them, you know. And most children, very few children can walk under about a year old, and most it's significantly older than that. So it takes a while. This is a complicated thing to do. There are other problems with walking, with standing up and walking too. For example, childbirth. Childbirth becomes extremely difficult because, obviously for women, because the pelvis has to change shape in order to support the load of the body above the hips, of standing up and walking, and more particularly of running. And this has been, this is a real problem for women. Childbirth is a big issue for women. Until the late 19th century, huge numbers of women died in childbirth, and not just in their first gravitas. It was commonplace for women to die in childbirth, and child and mother to die together, that sort of thing. This was really common because basically what happened was that so much bleeding, so much tissue damage was caused in the act of parturition that they bled to death. So standing up itself, why did we do it? A number of people have had a go at this. I think the most plausible one is from Steven Pinker, you know, professor at Harvard, I think. Sorry, Pete, Steve. Who suggested that he thought it was to do with being able to carry tools. And I think that's actually, you know, I thought about that for a number of years, and at first I was like, really? Because we know from other, you know, primates that they don't use very sophisticated tools, so what's the big deal with carrying them? But we'll make the assumption that our ancestors had figured out how to use slightly more sophisticated tools, slightly larger ones perhaps, and therefore had to carry them. And so if you're going to carry tools, you really need to stand up. You can imagine a chimp hopping around on 3 legs and doing it, but it's going to be a lot easier if you can just stand up, walk on 2 legs, carry whatever you have to carry. So I think in the end, and I did think about this a long time, I think Pinker's solution, that it was to do with standing up, was viable. It is actually the best one I've seen anyway. I've seen a few, and that's the best one. That leaves the question still of why, you know, why was it important for us to do this? And it must have been that we were moving around, right? That's the only reason. If you are constantly living up the same tree, then you don't need to carry anything anywhere. Similarly, if you're constantly living at the bottom of the same tree, what difference does it make? This suggests that the pressure to start walking around was yes, it was so that we could carry things, but there was something that stimulated us to want to move. And that's probably something to do with climate change, climate variation at least, such that we were actually following sources of food. So we start to move around. Now, we are a bit vague on what happened over the next 3 million years, but we know we have a very good fossil record. But in precise terms of how people lived, a lot of it is conjectural. We do know that modern humans appeared. People used to think that it was about 180,000 years ago, but this has been pushed back a bit. Now we believe that maybe 250,000, 300,000 years ago, the first modern humans appeared. And they were modern humans. They were just like us. They behaved as we do. They organized socially, as far as we can figure out. They organized socially very much the same as we did. Side conversation with my wife. Far was I, as they say. So this thing about walking or moving, locomoting, seems to have been pretty consistently part of human behavior for a very long time. And that brings us to the idea of what's often called the nomadic hunter and gatherers. Well, hunter-gatherers were not nomadic, and there still aren't. There's plenty of hunter-gatherer cultures extant in the world today, and we can study them, and we do. Although, unfortunately, their cultures have been lost in large part. First American cultures were actually quite well recorded by Europeans, and particularly by the Spanish and by the French. And we know a great deal about the way that these first Americans lived, and we know that they lived in two particular manners. Most of them, there are always exceptions, you know. They were either what's called sedentary, which means you live in one place, and when you need to perhaps go hunting or go fishing or whatever, you go out, you know. So all the things that you need are within a reasonable walking range, perhaps half a day. Or you're what's called semi-sedentary, right? And what is semi-sedentary? Well, that means that it's kind of like a camp society. And I don't mean, a camp society. I mean, such as could be seen there, yeah, well, never mind where it could be seen. They would have several camps which they would move around during the course of the year. And this is particularly the case in temperate zones where the climate changes throughout the year, and therefore the resources will change. You might move to a particular camp when you knew, for example, in North America, or that there would be a run of salmon in spring, because you want to catch fish. And then later in the year you might go somewhere else where there might be a particular fruit crop or something else that is easy to find during that period. So you will establish camps at each of these where you can move. Now, not everybody did this. Some first Americans basically just took their camps with them, but they still had locations that they used. They didn't just wander about. They would go to such a place and they would know that it had good water, it was sheltered, it had this, that, and good firewood, that sort of. They knew that they had what they needed nearby. So that is semi-sedentary, which some people in older books you'll see called peripatetic, and that's actually quite a good term for it. The thing that's interesting here is what stimulates us to be sedentary? What makes us want to stay in one place? And the answer is women. And that's not in a bad way. The function of any species is reproduction, right? You want to stay alive and reproduce, that's it. Now, human babies are a big problem. It's women. And the reason is that the function of any species is reproduction. It's just survival till you can reproduce. That's what we're here to do. So the protection of children becomes a big issue, and that's particularly the case for human children, because human children have a really long developmental period, now unusually long. If you consider large cattle, maybe adult size and adult weight of half a ton, it'll reach that weight in 2 years. A human male will take 20 years to reach a maximum size of around about 1/5 of that. So human growth rates are slowed, they're deliberately slowed. And why is that? It's to divert energy to the growth of our brains, which takes a huge amount of energy, right? So young humans are completely dependent on their carers, their parents, carers, the adults around them, until they're really in their mid-teens, and in fact, really a little later. So that means that you have to have a support structure. You can't just have a child like lions. Have a baby, the baby's 18 months, he goes away. Joins another pride, finds another, goes away, does something different. It no longer needs protection from the adults, because he's perfectly capable of protecting himself. Humans just aren't like that. Humans need the protection of those around them for a long time. And the protection of those around them will be their mothers, right? Get that straight right from the start. It's their mothers. Why is that? Men don't know who their kids are. Until you have a social structure in place which binds each woman to a particular man, men have no clue as to which children are theirs. With the result that it's more difficult to persuade men to come and look after the family, because they don't know which it is. It doesn't know, are these my kids? How would I know? So what happened is that women have been absolutely instrumental in developing human society and therefore civilization. Women needed to have places where they could safely bring up these children, which take a long time to grow up and which need a great deal of protection while they are growing up. They need to be protected from animals. If you have a baby who's crying, that'll attract predators from maybe half a mile, maybe a mile away. That's a problem. You need a place where you can defend your children. You don't want them being eaten by the local pack of wolves all the time. So there's a real big pressure from women to say, no, we're going to have to establish places where we can stay, we can remain in one place and thus protect the children. That's the important thing, to look after the kids. And of course, what brings the men back in order to bring help, and to help with this, isn't knowing who their kids are, it's sex. They get sex. Simple as that. So what happens is that sex becomes a commodity which women use to get what they want, which is in this case a nice safe place to live and bring up their kids. And even in semi-sedentary societies, you see exactly the same thing. If you look around on YouTube, there was certainly a good documentary on a tribe called the Zoe, Z-O-E, who live in the Amazon basin. They are a very, very classic tribal group of this kind. And if you look at the way they live, they basically move around a number of camps depending on what is the best hunting and foraging at any particular time of year. And they've actually introduced the next step, which leads us again towards ultimately civilization, which is horticulture. They actually have gardens. They grow a vegetable called manioc, which it's actually poisonous, but when you wash it, it's a bit like sweet potato. You can eat it, and it's very nourishing. And they grow some other herbs and plants. They also grow a particular herb which the women use to colour their skin red. So they have these gardens. Again, that's contributing to the idea of this sedentary living. We know that humans actually came out of Africa a long time ago, because we found records of other species, other than Homo sapiens, outside of Africa. However, for a very long time, it has been the consensus that modern humans left Africa sometime between about 50,000 and 60,000 years ago. And it seems to have been that what promoted that move, because what you have to understand is that for semi-sedentary and sedentary people, there's not really any reason to move. If you have all your resources at hand, and you have the salmon in the summer, and you have the potatoes in the autumn, and you have your gardens full of manioc or whatever it is, it's all sorted out. Well, why would you move? Why would you go somewhere else? Why would you take the risk of going somewhere else, having to find all this out again, and build up all this great store of knowledge that you need? And the reason seems to have been something to do with climate change. And what we do know is that around about 70,000 years ago, there was a really massive supervolcano at a place which is called Toba, now in Indonesia. And this was a vast explosion. It exploded 60 cubic kilometers of ash. It formed ash deposits meters thick all across the Deccan of India. Huge, and it would definitely have changed the climate of the planet for many, many years. And this may have been, we know that it reduced human populations drastically, although geneticists argue about how much by, but we know that it impacted the human populations dramatically. And it may well have been this, that provoked humans to start moving out of the places they had known so well, where they had everything, and to try and find new places to live. And we know that, well, the consensus has been for many years that, as I say, between 50 and 55,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago, our strain of modern humans came out from North Africa across, this was somewhere in the northeast of Africa. There are two potential routes, one the lower route, which is at the Gates of Grief, the southern end of the Red Sea, and the other one is the northern route, which is into the Levant, across Sinai. There's a lot of argument about which one it was. Argument which will probably never actually be resolved, to be honest with you. But we do know that that's where they came out. It was actually the only place they could come out, because they couldn't cross, you can't easily cross the Mediterranean. It's just too big. Even at Gibraltar, it's still not easy enough for people who didn't have, sophisticated boat technology to make that crossing. But the others, you definitely could. So that's this particular episode. What we were talking about here is the importance of standing up, the importance of walking around, and the idea that we are predisposed to settle. We don't really like being nomadic, and men might love it, Yeah, new thing every day, boys, great fun. But women hate it. The women hate it because they know they have to look after children, and moving children around is inherently dangerous, especially in an environment where there are predators. It's just something you would avoid doing if you possibly could, and that's your impetus, your basic underlying impetus towards establishing sedentary settlement, then permanent settlement, and ultimately, we will get there in a couple of episodes. We'll get to the point at which we actually start building really permanent settlements, and then cities. Okay, so we'll see you next time. We'll do one of these once a week. Hope you enjoy them. Please remember, like and share. Comments from my wife. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.